The Assassin Brotherhood shows up across the franchise, which makes sense for a game called Assassin's Creed. We'll always see different ideals and methods, but the one thing that stays the same is a Brotherhood's goal, and that is to protect freedom and keep the Templars in check. So here's what I want to do. I want to rank the Assassin Brotherhoods from worst to best based on how powerful they were, the impact that they had, and the staying power. Who actually pushed back a Templar state? Who, ran a city, kept civilians safe and left something that lasted? Stuff like that. Now, I'm using what we see in the games and a few major tie-ins, so without further ado, let's just jump straight into last place.
Hey, what's the matter you, Altair?
That's racist.
You're racist.
Okay, starting off, the modern day assassins are dead last for me, and for one main reason. They're just a complete mess. Now yes, their history is very long and interesting, but it's a history that's full of so much disaster. I'm talking about horrendous setbacks, there were betrayals between them, and they just seemed like they were reacting instead of being a leading organization. Every time they make progress, Abstergo finds a way to tear it all down again. Going back to the early 1900s, the assassins were already struggling. They struggled during the fall of the Russian Empire and both world wars. Of course, then came the Great Purge, which if you don't know, you should totally look it up, because the Great Purge was a near total wipeout of the modern Assassin Brotherhood that left them scattered across the world. And it's why when we see the modern day like that in the games, it always appears like they're hiding. The Great Purge was like a massacre. After that, they basically spent decades trying to survive, while Abstergo simply took over the world through a bunch of stuff like politics and technology. They even controlled governments. Plural, not singular. And even the times when I guess the assassins tried to, push back, it almost, if not always, ended in disaster. Look at Daniel Cross. That incident is a perfect example. The man was brainwashed by Abstergo, and he was used to destroy entire assassin safe houses from the inside. It doesn't get more tragic than that. By the 2000s and 2010s, they were still hanging on, kind of. But you see, it just kept getting worse and worse. Desmond's story was supposed to be their big comeback, but even that ended with more questions than answers. Juno got released. After Desmond's death, Layla tried to rebuild what was left, but the return of Basim made things even more unstable. And we don't know after that. Even Ubisoft doesn't really know what they're doing anymore. At this point, the modern day assassins are not really a brotherhood. I'd say they're more like a handful of lucky survivors scattered across the world. I will say though, their story has so much potential, but right now they sit dead last in the ranking.
We are responsible for killing innocents and destroying cities. This mad grab for power. It ends now.
Okay, now next up in the video we have the Colonial Brotherhood, and they're quite low even though they had immense potential. Now early on they look great. Achilles sets up the homestead, he builds friendships with New France and the indigenous nations. He even recruits pretty good talent. It feels like the colonies are about to become a real assassin powerhouse. And then the 7 Years' War hits, and even Shay Cormac, he touches a first civilization site in Lisbon and everything collapses in the, worst way possible. Shay even warned them about this artifact, but the Colonial Brotherhood did not listen. I'd actually say that Lisbon disaster was the turning point. Thousands of innocent lives died because of the Colonial Brotherhood, and Shay turns into a Templar and becomes the Brotherhood's most effective enemy. Haytham and the Colonial Right used that split to wipe the chapter out. By 1763, the Colonial Assassins were basically gone. Yes, Achilles is spared, but he's kinda useless now because he's crippled, and the homestead is a ghost of what it was. Now, I can forgive losses in a war, but I cannot forgive a strategy that chases artifacts whilst putting the innocent lives at risk. That was on leadership. And that is the next problem. The colonial branch of assassins leans way too much on singular individuals. Before the fall, it is Achilles and a very short list. After the fall, it is basically Connor alone. Yes, Connor is a monster on the field in the best way possible. He tears down the colonial right piece by piece. He takes out Haytham and Charles Lee. And he still finds time to keep Washington breathing. But when one prodigy is carrying the whole region, that to me says the organization underneath is paper thin. We can also look at how the Colonial Brotherhood's downfall affected those alliances, especially towards the indigenous nations. Connor believed the revolution will protect his people. I mean, in the game he literally supported the revolutionaries' bid for independence, only to watch his village get sold out after. That is not on him, it is on a brotherhood that could not translate battlefield wins into political protection for the communities it said it would defend. People will point out that this branch later becomes the American Brotherhood, and has some incredible moments across the 19th and 20th centuries. Fair, but I am ranking broken the colonial era on its own record, and that record is a streak of early wins followed by one of the fastest, ugliest collapses in the franchise, rescued mostly by one incredible apprentice, Connor. So yeah, second last for me.
Easy, I won't harm you. I just need that box.
Next in the ranking is the Russian Brotherhood, and this group is one of the more dark and tragic ones because you see, they seemed like extremists, and every time they did something it often left behind a disaster. Their methods were way too messy. They assassinated Tsar Alexander II, they tried to kill his son, and caused some disasters that still get talked about today. One of those was the Tunguska explosion in 1908, which in Assassin's Creed lore was the result of the assassins trying to take a Staff of Eden from a Templar research base. They brought in Nikola Tesla to blast the site with one of his energy experiments while Nikolai Orlov and his crew slipped in to steal the artifact. It went completely sideways. The energy beam hit the staff, it overloaded, and boom, a massive blast leveled miles of forest. Everyone died except for Nikolai Orlov, which is definitely main character plot armor, but that's the kind of insane scale these guys operated on. When they made a mistake, it changed history. After that, Nikolai Orlov kept having to deal with unfortunate scenarios. I mean, during the Russian Revolution, he saved Princess Anastasia from the Templars, but when he found out his own brotherhood planned to experiment on her, he turned against them. From there, things just fell apart. Joseph Stalin, and yes, that Joseph Stalin, he rose. The Templars started to gain control, and by the modern day, the entire Russian branch was gone, simply wiped out by its own experiments, leaving only Galina Varanina alive, who you might recognize from the cutscenes of Assassin's Creed Syndicate. But even she was tragic, because she literally had to kill her own family after an animus experiment went wrong. So yeah, the Russian Brotherhood ranks low for me, not because they were weak, but because they completely lost their humanity along the way and self-deprecated.
Stay your blade from the flesh of the innocent.
Hide in plain sight.
Never compromise the Brotherhood.
Okay, next up we've got the Parisian Brotherhood, and oh boy, this brotherhood drives me crazy. They sit just above the colonial chapter, but I'm not going to lie, that's not saying much. This brotherhood is the perfect example of a brotherhood that completely lost its edge. Half of them act more like politicians than assassins. They spend most of Unity sitting around and arguing. But first, before I go over Unity's side of the story, let's talk about the wins beforehand. So in 1307, they helped push King Philip to tear down the public face of the Templars. That's a pretty big W. Later, they trained Joan of Arc, who by the way we need to see in a mainline game. Please, Ubisoft. Anyway, they trained her to use a Sword of Eden, which actually ended up helping the French army in the 100 Years' War. And even during the main part, the French Revolution itself, I would say they looked pretty stacked, to be fair. Mirabeau tries a truce with Grandmaster de la Serre to stop the cycle. It was risky, yes, but you can see the plan. After both leaders are murdered, Arno and Elise hunt down Germain and help bring the terror to an end. That is impact. They even stay relevant after. They protect Napoleon. They send Jules Brunet, who I think is in Rise of the Ronin actually, to help the Japanese Brotherhood. They shut down a setup at the Eiffel Tower that would have branded them as literal terrorists. Now, the part that makes me roll my eyes. The council in Unity is painful, easily one of the worst in the franchise. They barely do anything and exist just to complain about Arno. The man kills Lafreniere, who he believes is part of Francois Thomas Germain's Templar plot, and they lose their minds over it. It doesn't make sense. What are you mad about? One even calls him a murderer, which doesn't make sense. I mean, you are assassins, that is the job. And when Arno actually closes on the people tearing the city apart, they kick him out for not asking for permission. They are also pretty easy to play. During the French Revolution, Germain strings Arno along more than once, and the council expels their best asset at the worst time. Now, isn't that a pattern? When the pressure rises, their leadership loses the plot. The infighting is probably the nail in the coffin. I mean, Bellic poisoning Mirabeau is the perfect example. You have a brotherhood trying to defuse a national meltdown, and a master assassin decides the council is weak and starts a purge from the inside. Arno ends up cleaning that mess up while the city bleeds. The cafe theatre era is cool, but you know, if you look under the floorboards, you have a team that argues more than they actually do anything. Now, to be fair, Arno was not perfect. Killing Lafreniere was a mistake that actually played into Francois Thomas Germain's hands. But even with that, the council's reaction was, in my opinion, quite overkill. So yeah, they do sit quite low in this video.
I will not live with the dishonor!
Agate! No!
Now next up is the Louisiana Brotherhood of Assassins. Now I'll be honest, there's not a whole lot to go on with this one. They're one of the smaller and less talked about branches in the Assassin's Creed lore, and most of what we do know about them comes from Assassin's Creed Liberation. Still, from what we do know, they are an interesting group with a unique story. The Louisiana Brotherhood was founded around 1759 by Agathe, a survivor from the Saint Dominique Brotherhood after it fell apart. It was a small operation based mostly in New Orleans, with Agathe leading from the bayou, while his apprentices like Aveline handled things in the city. Their main goal was to fight the Templars' control in Louisiana and, importantly, free enslaved people, something that made their chapter stand out from most others. I'd say Aveline is really the heart of this group. She's one of the few female protagonists in the series, and most of what made this brotherhood matter came from her actions. She exposed so much corruption, she literally took down the Louisiana right of the Templars, and she freed countless slaves, even if it meant disobeying her mentor, which unfortunately she had to confront him because of that tension. However, after Agathe's death, Aveline carried on working alongside Connor and helping shape what would later become part of the American Brotherhood. So yeah, they are small, they didn't really get much spotlight, but the Louisiana Assassins didn't really do much wrong. But they only did things in a tiny area.
We are the League of the Hidden Blade, the Kakushibaiki, united, always, in the Kakushibaiki.
Okay, moving on, we have the Japanese Brotherhood, and I'm going to be upfront, we don't have decades of deep dive canon here. Most of what matters is tied to Assassin's Creed Shadows, so take this as a snapshot. I haven't really read most of the Japanese era Assassin's Creed novels and manga, so I can only really talk about what I'm familiar with. So the first assassin to bring the creed to Japan was a Spanish assassin, and he was called Alvaro Cataribera. A bit of a retcon, but I guess we move. He teamed up with a local girl named Siyu, and together they started the Kakushibaiki. Basically, their main job wasn't really similar to traditional assassins in that they want to hunt Templars down, but more importantly, as boring as this sounds, it was to protect the imperial regalia, the sacred treasures of Japan, after Emperor Go-Nara trusted them with it. Now that's a massive responsibility, and for a while it seemed like they were doing quite well, but things went pretty downhill very fast. Siyu took over after Alvaro Cataribera left, but her group was actually betrayed from the inside and destroyed by the Shinbaku, who are a Templar-based faction trying to control Japan. Most of her league was wiped out and the regalia was stolen. Now what's crazy is her daughter Nawe, alongside Yasuke, who we know from Assassin's Creed Shadows, later brought the Brotherhood back. They recovered the regalia, they crushed the Shinbaku literally, and even earned the respect of Tokugawa Ieyasu, the future shogun of Japan. During that time they operated from the shadows, no pun intended, helping maintain peace under the shogunate while keeping the Templars out of power. But by the 1800s, Japan's modernization and Western influence started to undo all of their progress. They sided with the shogunate during the Boshin War, and while they did fight pretty hard, it all ended in loss. The age of samurai faded and the Templars twisted Japan's new political system to their benefit. Even after that, the Japanese assassins tried to stay strong. They actually rebuilt, eventually becoming the Osaka Brotherhood in modern times. Their modern mentor, by the way, named Saiko Mochizuki, is actually one of the cooler hidden figures in recent lore. She rebuilt the order by merging it with local Yakuza groups, which sounds insane but it actually worked, and by doing this they managed to survive Abstergo's Great Purge and became one of the few modern cells that were strong enough. So yeah, they're not near the top of my ranking, but I guess they do definitely deserve some respect.
You will have to live knowing an assassin beat you. The men who stand here now will know you were defeated.
Next in the ranking is the Indian Brotherhood, and they're a strange one to rank because weirdly, they keep clutching up during moments where they shouldn't be. I don't really know too much about them apart from what we see in Chronicles India and Assassin's Creed Syndicate, but they've been around for a really long time. Like all the way back to the 1st century, they've seen it all. They've seen empires rise and fall, they've seen Templars come and go, and somehow they always manage to hang on, which kind of confuses me. During the 1500s, they were based in Calicut, which is of course located in India, and they spent a lot of time fighting off the Portuguese Templars. I'd say one thing that really made them stand out was how they fought. Instead of the usual, relying on blades, they used fear as a weapon. It's said that they often use smoke bombs, they use spikes, hallucinogens, all designed to scare enemies into surrendering. I mean, it's actually kind of genius, and it even inspired how the British Brotherhood operated later on. I mean, it's the reason we see Evie Fry and Jack the Ripper in Syndicate using a lot of these tools. The Indian Brotherhood introduced them there. Then during the 1800s you had people like Arbaz Mia and his mentor Hamid leading the way. Their story with the Koh-i-Noor, which in my opinion is probably the most powerful piece of Eden hands down, and even the precursor box is quite crazy. They're dealing with British Templars, Afghan warlords, and even getting betrayed inside their own ranks. But they always found a way to bounce back. Arbaz's son, Jaydeep, or better known as Henry Green from Assassin's Creed Syndicate, later heads to London and he allies with Jacob and Evie, and he actually helps take down the British Templars there. That said, they've had some pretty hard-hitting moments too. I mean, take the British invasion for example. That broke a lot of their strength. And of course the Great Purge, which will be mentioned a few times in this video, which nearly wiped them out in the modern day. Still, you cannot ignore how much they contributed. The Indian Brotherhood deserves a solid mid-spot in this video.
Stay your blade from the flesh of the innocent. Hide in plain sight. Never compromise the Brotherhood.
Okay, moving on, we've got the Hidden Ones of Alamut, and to be fair, they're one of the newer pieces of Assassin's Creed lore, so there's a lot we still fully don't know about them. As of me making this video, this is before the Mirage DLC comes out, so maybe we'll see more about them then. Now, they first appeared properly in Assassin's Creed Mirage, which finally gave us a look at what the early Brotherhood looked like before it became the assassins we know. The Hidden Ones of Alamut operated during the 9th century, based out of the Alamut fortress in Persia, and if you know your stuff, that is the same Alamut that later became legendary under Hassan I-Sabah, who in real history was the founder of the Nizari Ismaili sect, widely known as the Hashashin. Basically the first assassins in history. Now in Assassin's Creed, apart from them hunting down the Order of the Ancients in Baghdad, which is pretty standard stuff, let's be honest, they actually tried to protect something far more mysterious, which was an ezio temple hidden beneath the fortress. Their mentor Rayhan along with Fulad and Rashan led the group, training people like Basim, who would later go on to form new brotherhoods across the world. We mostly see their story through Mirage, and it is clear that this was a turning point for the Creed. Basim's journey with them sadly ends in betrayal, but it shows how Alamut was the birthplace of what the Brotherhood would become. So yeah, the Hidden Ones of Alamut are still pretty new, but they're the roots of everything. They deserve to be high up because of the founding and early nature of them, especially with the tie into Hassan I-Sabah. Okay, next up, we're kind of halfway in I think, and we now have the West Indies Brotherhood. This brotherhood proves how much a smart mentor and a few clutch recruits can change the whole map. In the early 1700s, they were based in Tulum with Atabai being the mentor. The goal they wanted to obtain was pretty simple, well on paper that is. It was to keep the observatory out of Templar hands and track the Sage, aka Bartholomew Roberts. Now to be fair, this starts very rough. Edward Kenway walks in pretending to be an assassin, he sells the maps to the Templars and basically gets half the Caribbean Bureau network burned. That's not ideal, but credit where it's due, with Mary Read pulling him toward the Creed. Hey, that rhymed. Edward decides to help defend Tulum, and he turned it into a real asset. From there, the Brotherhood spreads out with bureaus in Havana, Kingston, Nassau, and even the Cayman Islands. They hunt the West Indies right, which ends up going quite well to be fair. Then they secure the observatory, and finally take down the big Templar names across the region. By the end, Atabai accepts Edward for real and moves the headquarters to Great Inagua. I do think the ripple effect that this had was pretty huge because Adewale joins. He fights slavers in Freedom Cry, and he also backs the Maroons in Saint Dominique. Atabai's last student Achilles heads north and starts the Colonial Brotherhood that Connor later carries on. So this one Caribbean branch ends up seeding two major lines in the franchise. Now don't get me wrong, they're not spotless. Early mistakes almost break them and pirate drama follows them literally everywhere. But when you add up all the wins, the West Indies Brotherhood did very well, and in this video they deserve to be above mid for me.
Ezio, where is your hook blade?
My hook blade?
Okay, moving on, we've got the Ottoman Brotherhood, basically the Constantinople part we see in Revelations, and this one is much easier to rank. They're quite smart in how they move, and most importantly, unlike plenty of other brotherhoods I've already talked about in this video, these people actually walk the walk instead of talking the talk. The roots go way back with the Hidden Ones, but the real turning point is the 1200s when Niccolo and Mafia Polo set up a proper assassin's guild on Altair's orders and hid the Masyaf keys. Later, after 1453, Ishak Pasha, the mentor of the Ottoman Brotherhood during this time, makes peace with the Ottoman rulers and turns the city into a real stronghold for the Creed. Now, that plan he set in place was actually very important because it gives the assassins a home with dens across the city, while the Byzantine right of the Templars keeps trying to claw its way back. By the early 1500s, they started surging. You have Piri Rice crafting bombs. There was of course the legendary hook blade that was made for fast climbing and zip lines. And of course they started recruiting locals into effective street level assassins, something we can do in Revelations. Of course then, to make things even better for them, the GOAT himself, Ezio, arrives, and with Yusuf Tazim leading those new turned assassins and even Ezio helping out, they just clean out Templar pockets. On top of that, they chase down the Masyaf keys right under the Byzantines' noses. I think the most difficult moment that they had was really the situation with Prince Ahmed. He wants the keys for his own plan, so we see him kidnap Sophia and strike the Brotherhood where it hurts. That unfortunately led to Yusuf being killed, which is one of the sadder moments in the franchise, but Ezio rallies the city's assassins and shuts Ahmed down. Of course, Selim finishes the job by pushing him off a cliff, which then allowed for Ezio to stabilize the Ottoman Brotherhood by putting a man named Dogan in charge to be a mentor. Now, I'll be honest, I can't remember who Dogan is, but yeah, he's a mentor.
We're wasting our time out here.
You know as well as I do that London has been the domain of the Templars for the last 100 years. They are far too strong yet.
The British Brotherhood sits pretty high for me, because when they click, they really click. Their roots go all the way back to Roman Britain. Then they strangely vanish. Then Basim and Hytham ride back in during Valhalla and rebuild a chapter out of Ravenstone with Eivor's help. They clear out the Order of the Ancients in England, and Alfred quietly flips that order into what becomes the Templars. Yeah, it is I guess a nice little twist, but to be fair, it's messy with long-term consequences. I would say the real golden window would be the 1700s, so Edward Kenway links up with Miko, who would be the leader of the British Brotherhood, and London turns into a proper assassin thriving place with reach in high society and the streets. And then the tragic moment of Reginald Birch ruining everything. Edward gets killed, rest in peace. Haytham steals the Grand Temple key, Miko gets stabbed at the theatre, and London falls back into Templar control. That right there, that slump lasts a long time. But here's exactly why they're high up in this video. Because the comeback is the Fry era. So Jacob and Evie's mother and father being Cecily and Ethan Fry, they were the great assassins in Crawley. Then Henry Green, who we all know, builds the network which then leads to the twins Evie and Jacob coming into London to dismantle the entire operation of Crawford Starrick, and of course obtain the Shroud of Eden. Now after that, you still get dark chapters like Jack the Ripper, which shows how easily a recruit can twist the creed if the mentorship fails. They stay active through the World Wars, with Lydia Fry helping Winston Churchill crack a spy ring at Tower Bridge. And then once again, that also tragic Great Purge in 2000 hits and wipes most of them off the board. Some survive, but you know, it's just scraps. But yeah, that's why I think they belong here in the video. I think it's quite respectable.
I have renounced Aya. I have killed Aya. I am now the Hidden One, known as Amunet.
Moving on, we have the Egyptian Brotherhood. And this one ranks quite high for me, because this is the birthplace. Bayek of Siwa and Aya take grief and turn it into a system. They start as Magi, chasing the Order of Ancients and getting pulled into the, the Cleopatra and Caesar mess. And then they get burned when power wins out. That right there is where the Hidden Ones begin. Bayek recovers an Apple of Eden from Flavius, Aya heads to Rome and becomes Amunet, and then the two of them kind of turn a personal tragedy into a movement that spans until the modern day. It was them who started it all. What I love here is how quickly they set a standard. In Memphis and across the Sinai, Bayek builds a ton of bureaus, and he trains a lot of recruits. After the Romans hit back in the DLC, he and Amunet regroup and lay down the first real, ideals of the creed. There's of course no killing innocents, there's no fame to be had, there's work in silence. I've actually made a video similar to this breaking down how Bayek became the definition of a hidden one. Check it out if you want. Then you get the final synod in Alexandria where Amunet tells them to vanish and let the work speak. That is the creed forming in real time. I also love how they act when it matters. For example, Amunet pushes Cleopatra to end the war, the only way left, and safeguards Caesarion. The network spreads towards Judea and across the Mediterranean. Centuries later, they are still fighting, and even when they take some pretty bad losses, like all the way forward in 1798 when Napoleon snatched the apple, or when they failed to secure the Ankh in the 1800s, they keep moving forward. So why third place, you may be asking? Well, it's basically just impact. They define the rules that everyone else follows and keeps their focus on protecting people instead of just chasing after power. Colonial Brotherhood.
Go, son. Go be with your family. And live well.
Now, in second place, I am putting the Levantine Brotherhood there. This is the chapter that turns the idea of the Hidden Ones into a force that shapes the whole series. Hassan I-Sabah planted the flag at Alamut in 1090 and put the order in the public eye. Then Al-Mualim establishes Masyaf in the Levant, and the Brotherhood becomes the name every crusader and emir whispers at night. But, and big but, the turning point is Altair. As I'm sure we're all aware, Altair messes up at Solomon's temple and he gets absolutely humiliated, which then forces him to take up the Templar leadership target by target. When Al-Mualim's betrayal comes to light, Altair ends it and rebuilds the order from the ground up. He takes Mentor and writes the Codex. We see him toss out dead rules like the finger sacrifice and build new methods. You know, stuff like the air assassinations, it was Altair. The ledge kills, it was Altair. The poison work, the whole toolkit most branches copy later, it was Altair. It was all because of this legendary assassin. I've made a video going over the Codex in depth if you want to check it out. It's a pretty detailed video. Now, don't get me wrong, the Levantine Brotherhood is not all good, and I'm sure you all know that already. For example, Abbas Sophian's power grab becomes a shit show. Altair's son Seth is murdered, his wife Maria dies, and Masyaf turns rotten under bad leadership. But you see, Altair returns to fix it, and then makes the most important move, which is to disband from Masyaf and operate among the people instead, not above them. He locks the apple in the library, which we see. He sends the polos out with the keys and the writings and turns the Brotherhood into a global blueprint. That single decision is why later games and Brotherhoods even exist. If you think about it, Altair really was the blueprint, and that's why this Brotherhood is in second place. They set the standard everybody else copies. Only one branch edges them out in my ranking, and I'll explain why that is.
We work in the dark to serve the light. We are assassins.
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
And now in first place is the Italian Brotherhood. This is the gold standard for how a branch should build power and leave something that lasts. They had roots before Ezio thanks to Altair and the Polos setting up Monteriggioni, and of course the Auditore took over leadership for nearly 2 decades. I'd say they reached their peak during the Renaissance when Giovanni Auditore and his sons uncovered a massive Templar conspiracy tied to the Borgias. After Giovanni's execution, Ezio took up the Hidden Blade and rebuilt the Brotherhood from the ground up. Yes, he started small, taking down, corrupt nobles and fighting back against the Pazzi and the Barbarigo families. And then years later, when the Borgia blew the walls open in Monteriggioni in 1500 and killed Mario Auditore, that should have ended them. But nope. Instead, Ezio rebuilds in Rome. He builds a system that keeps working when he's not there. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in Rome, you see a full network. There's thieves, there's courtesans, there's mercenaries, all tied into bureaus and a council with, Machiavelli, La Volpe, Bartholomew, and Claudia, I think. They free districts, they burn towers and recruit locals into real apprentices. And what's interesting is that those apprentices I just talked about, they can literally become literal squads that Ezio can send out across Italy and beyond. That's the scale. Now that right there to me is how you crack a Templar state like the Borgia Papacy. Now, as for the impact of what they did, it was very big, and I mean very big, because for example, take the literal Pope Rodrigo Borgia. He gets contained in the Vatican. Cesare Borgia is chased down to Vienna and finished. Even pieces of Eden like the apple, the Italian assassins secured it and studied it just enough to understand the risk. And then what did they do with it? Well, they hid it under the Colosseum so it stops ruining lives. Now compare that to the colonial assassins who did the complete opposite, which caused the Lisbon earthquake. And then when it comes to the aftermath of the Borgia's downfall, Rome, the city that was once under the Borgia control, went from a Templar capital to a literal city where the creed can breathe. And even Venice grows into a proper assassin branch. Now, are they perfect? Absolutely not. They've had some messy moments, don't get me wrong. I mean, the Medici ties, the whole Cappadocia moment will always start debates among fans. But look at the choices when it counts. They keep civilian damage down compared to other eras. And Ezio in Altair's library chooses to walk away from the apple. So yeah, the Italians for me take the number 1. That is what a Brotherhood should look like.